150 years now. Became a research station in the 50s. That was the vision of Jack Christie, and it's continues to the present day. So where do we do our work? Unfortunately, made my slides too big and the screen too small. But anyway, from the base of Niagara Falls all the way through Lake Ontario, the bathymetry is colored there. So the blue part's the deep part, the deepest points, 226 meters. That's about 680 feet deep. So it gets pretty darn deep. And then we go all the way down the St. Lawrence River to Cornwall. So it's a very large and diverse watershed we work in, and then the tributaries. So the streams that flow in, we classified up to the first impassable barriers. That's where there's a dam or a waterfall. After that, the districts take over. But a lot of diversity of programs involved in what we do. So why do we do it? Principally, we do it to manage fisheries. And so as some of you may know, maybe all of you know, there is still a very active commercial fishery operating in the Bay of Quinte. And in the upper St. Lawrence River, there's a significant recreational fishery, and with Mohawks, the Bay of Quinte upstream, Akwesasne's down in the St. Lawrence River, there are also active First Nation fisheries that still have harvesting rights. So we work to find balance and harmony amongst these different fisheries, but also we're managing the lake for a healthy ecosystem. So healthy lakes support healthy communities. The water that we draw comes out of Lake Ontario. We swim in it, we boat in it, we enjoy it in many ways. And so we want to make sure the lake remains healthy, it's sustainable, that the fisheries of today can support the future, biodiversity, so the variety of animals that are out there. There are the things that we exploit, the walleye, the bass, the salmon and trout, but there's lots of other organisms out there that support those ecosystems. And we want to make sure all of that exists for future generations. So that's really what we do. So who are we? Again, I mentioned this a little bit earlier. There's approximately 30 of us that are full-time or contract people, and then we double that in the summer. A lake manager, myself as the research scientist, and then some operations people, just administrative support, lots of technicians and biologists that run the boats, set the nets, and process the samples. And then, as you can see in the right-hand corner, summer students and graduate students. The fleet, the boats that you may see moving around Lake Ontario. So the upper left there, the Ontario Explorer. That's our flagship vessel. She's 22 meters long, so 68 feet. Displaces about 127 tons. As we sit in the yacht club, I feel I should make some nautical references to things. But that vessel is roughly 10 years old now. It's used largely for our open lane operations. So we'll set gill nets, pull trawls, deploy equipment over the sides with that. The vessel in the upper right is the Jack Christie, going into her 4th season now. So much faster platform. That's the vessel that my program oversees. And so we do a lot of work all across the lake. Jack Christie can move along at about 26 knots. The Ontario Explorer with the tailwind and a current can move at about 8 knots. So it's a big lake when you're only moving at 8 knots. Across the bottom, again, unfortunately, things don't pan well. Lower right is an electrofishing boat. That is typically used at night. You may see it. There'll be a lot of lights. They probe along the shoreline, but as the name may suggest, we induce electricity into the water. It stuns the fish. They float up. We can measure them, do all the ID with them, and we let them go, and they swim away again. On the right-hand side is a creel vessel. So when we go out and talk to the public when they're fishing, that's what we call creel programs. We have active program of that on summer and winter. And then between just some classic fisheries boats, like commercial fishing we use these days. They're trailable. They let us get many places around the lake. It's often faster to trailer a boat down to Hamilton than it would be to run a boat. Health and safety, a big significant component of our program. If you ever go by in the second week of June, you're taking the ferry, you'll notice all these crazy people jumping off the docks and floating around in bright orange suits. But as I say, in the summer, we double our numbers. And so for all of these youth that we bring on, as well as our new staff, we want to make sure that they operate safely. Lake Ontario has a great lake. Some people refer to it as the inland seas. When the weather picks up on Lake Ontario, it can get very nasty very quickly. And so we want to make sure that our staff are trained. And so we go through a very extensive week-long training exercise with them. but really the what do we do? So I think when most of you would think of a fishery station, this is kind of the classic things. We assess the stock. Who's out there? How many of them are there? Are they growing well? Are they healthy? And then we assess the fisheries. There's an enforcement operation that just sort of makes sure everyone's following the laws. And then stocking is probably the major action you think that we'd be doing. We're not counting fish, we're putting other fish out there. But the reality is what we do is it's a little bit more than that. So we think about invasive species. These are organisms that don't belong in the lake. Zebra mussels is a classic one. Undoubtedly, everyone has experienced crunching their feet on a beach, seeing them encrusting on their docks and water lines. The Asian carp you hear about, these giant fish that jump up in the air and create all sorts of problems around gobies, on and on it goes. So we understand the risk of invasive species getting into the lake because when they get in, they can change the entire function and community of the lake. So the consequences can be very severe. We want to try to manage and keep them out. The limnology that Nancy mentioned, that's basically the study of the ecosystem, the lower level. So this is the nutrients, the small animals that live in it, things that are largely invisible to us, but they're, of course, the base of the food web. They're what keeps the lake healthy, so they support our fisheries. Ecosystem science is starting to weave all that together. So most what my job is I develop computer games, for lack of a better reference. I build computer models that allow managers and biologists to pose questions of the system. So what if the species came in? What if lost their link there? Oh, there it's back. What if the temperature goes up with climate change? What if the lake levels go down? Or, a few years back when the lake levels were so high, what if we get a spill of a chemical in the system? And so that's most of what I do is develop these models through decision support that allows managers, decision makers to basically be able to have some foresight of what the risk of something is, to know, is this a crisis that we need to act on right away, or is this something that we can hold off on? I think we've got a loose connection somewhere.
We do.
Where are we? We're back. Okay, so I'm going to quickly just walk you through a little bit more. So the stock assessment, that's really, as you can image embedded in your mind, it's the whole community of fishes, and we have a variety of programs we do. So we function much like a commercial fishery, but we use additional resources on top of that. And
I think you're just having a hard time downloading.
So we use gill nets. You can see the map in the lower left. There's dots all over the eastern portion of Lake Ontario, so all around the county, throughout the Bay of Quinte. We'll set nets at strategic times of year. Small mesh gill nets catch little fish, large mesh catch big fish. And so we use different choice of meshes in order to sample the target fish, the ones we need to know the most about in that situation. Who's spawning when? What is the fish available to a fishery? Upper right, a trawl. That's like towing a giant sock through the water. It catches everything. It's not a lethal gear, and so we can sample the fish and we can let them go. The trap net is kind of like a giant minnow trap. It's basically just a big impoundment gear. It's what most of the commercial fishery uses in the Bay of Quinte. And this just allows the fish, they encounter a long lead, like a fence, as they swim along the shoreline. They can either evolve on the land, or most of them choose to swim out into the water, and they swim into the pot of the net. We count them, we measure them, we let them go. So we have a lot of different methods we use. The different maps, again, lower left gill nets, just a representation, very concentrated in the Bay of Quinte. The trawling just shows lake-wide. It's divided between ourselves and the U.S. agencies, but we try to cover the whole lake, 320 kilometers long, 80 kilometers wide. It's a big lake. It's deep. And then trap nets, using Toronto Harbor as an example. We'll go into areas we call an area of concern. We go in there very intensively to understand what's going on and see how the health of the ecosystem is being affected. The fishery assessment. So this is the extractive part of a fishery. This is what anglers catch, but it's also what the commercial fishery takes. And so the upper pictures are both a winter and a summer creel survey, where we go out and we actively engage with the angling public, and the lower pictures of the commercial fishery operating the south shore of the county and up in the Bay of Quinte. And again, those fisheries are much more small scale. When most people think of a commercial fishery, they think of these massive trawlers working offshore in the oceans, dragging everything up. This is functionally, it's a niche fishery. They are targeting very specific species to support exclusive fisheries, most of them locally and regionally important. Species restoration. So sometimes through our human actions, we impact the lake. Imagine that. Who would have thought it? But, and so some species have become extinct. The American eel, the example on the left. American eel are an amazing species. There used to be the largest population on the planet. It used to migrate into Lake Ontario. They would spend 20 years growing up, and then they turn and swim back down the St. Lawrence River, and they meet up with all their cousins from all around the planet off of Bermuda in what's called the Sargasso Sea. The whole world's population reproduces there, and then the babies reallocate themselves around the world. But along the way, we like to charge our phones, run our computers. We need electricity. So we dropped a couple of dams across the St. Lawrence River. So this one is the Moses Saunders Dam at Cornwall. So dams have turbines. Turbines are basically like big propellers. Eels are swimming downstream at the point they realize they're in the race of a turbine. About 42% of all the eels that migrate down the St. Lawrence River die in these turbines every year. We're working right now to try to find ways to mitigate passage. When you take 20 years to mature it, 42% of you die every time you go downstream. The population that came into Lake Ontario used to number the tens of millions. We now sample tens of thousands. That's all that's left of them anymore. Atlantic salmon, a species that used to be super abundant throughout this region. They migrated up from the Atlantic Ocean. They disappeared in the 1800s. The province has worked with partners 40 years now to try to bring them back into the system. That's the classroom hatchery program I talked about. It's much easier to extinct the species than it is to bring it back. My final example, bloater restoration, another species that just gradually went extinct. Basically, when sea lamprey became abundant, a big predator out there, a parasite, lake trout populations collapsed, as well as the other native salmon. And so the bloater population eventually collapsed as it was being outcompeted. We've been trying to bring this species back. The picture in the upper right, these species spawn in 100 meters of water, 300 feet of water in February. So for us to get viable eggs to bring into a hatchery to rear, we had to figure out ways to get out onto the lake, how to rear them in a hatchery, and gradually we've been working at about 15 years. We're seeing some success. Stocking, so that's the success side. So upper picture there, that's a walleye. We try to collect local fish and harvest the eggs and the milk from those fish so that we maintain the genetic diversity that's best suited to Lake Ontario. We then transfer those eggs up to hatcheries, the lower left picture, where they're reared up. Upper right is a stocking truck. We load those onto our large vessel, the Ontario Explorer, and we distribute them offshore to where the fish are best suited, where we think the habitats are best aligned. And the lower right is simply some fish after release starting to swim away. But last year, or 2024, we released about 1.8 million fish into the lake. So we do introduce lots of fish to try to support the fishery and the biodiversity. Last two slides. So the research that I'm involved in, the variety of things. So the picture in the upper left, Jacqueline Brown using a plankton net to sample zooplankton. So the little inset there, not super clear if you're in the back of the room, but just the diversity of plankton. These are the tiny little animals, but these are microscopic. They're a millimeter or two long that fit on the head of a pin. But ultimately, those are what feed the small fish that feed the large fish that let you catch big walleye and trout and salmon. eDNA in the lower left corner. So eDNA is kind of like the smoke detector of the environment. All of us, gradually our hair falls out, skin cells flush off. For fish, they're covered in mucus. As they swim around, this mucus sloughs off them. It leaves a trail of where they were. We can go out now and we can sample water, run it through a very fine filter, and we can look for the DNA. That's the building block. Ultimately, that's the identity of each one of you as individuals. We can actually go out and extract that from the water, and we can say for things like invasive species detection. We can't say the fish was physically here now. We can say that fish was here recently. So when a new species comes in, it's a very effective way to track them down. The upper right, fish culture practices. Again, unfortunately, the image isn't super clear for you here. So when we started to rear these floater to bring them back, as I said, we collect them in 100 meters, 300 feet of water. These fish are used to living under great pressure. Our fish hatcheries have shallow raceways as deep as these tables. And so you're rearing a fish in a shallow environment that needs to live in a deep environment. First thing we learned when we started to stock these fish out is they underwent what's called barotrauma. So if you're an angler, sometimes you pull a fish up from depth and you see how its swim bladder is all swollen in its mouth. That's the opposite. That's a decompression barotrauma. In our case, we release these fish. They swam down. As they swam down, their bodies get squeezed until they pass out. And so we were stocking viable fish, but they couldn't survive in the environment we were stocking them into. So we had to begin to find ways to manage the culture of fish. It's not just as simple as raising a baby. It's how to adapt them to the environment they go in. Underwater videography in the middle, just our eyes under the water to see what's going on in places we can't. Tissue analysis, just read the food label on your can of soup. We do the same thing with the environment. What is the quality of the environment out there? Then my last slide here, new technology. So on my way in, Art was mentioning to me, oh, I thought that's so cool where you guys put these tags in. So the map on the upper left there, all those little dots correspond to a receiver. It's basically a listening device that's on the bottom of Lake Ontario. We have a mechanism that we can pop them off and recover them every year to replace the batteries and download the data. But we put little transmitters, little things about the size of your pinky digit, inside fish. They swim around, and every time they get within a distance of those, we know it's timestamped. We know when and where it was. We can now begin to understand which areas are important to fish at what times of year, what species are there. That can make our assessment programs better. But also when we think about how humans interact with those species, we can again understand where the stresses are that are important habitats for the fish. Upper right, autonomous sampling. So the lower picture is a bit of an inset. So a couple of years ago, working with one of our academic partners, we in essence have released a couple of these mini submarines. They are programmed to follow a track, just like a GPS trail if you were driving along in your car on your boat. And so these things go out, they go down to the bottom, they can come back to the surface. We can program them where they sample. It's a whole lot easier for us to send a little mini sub out there. If you're a boater, you don't have to worry. You're not going to run into it. It's not going to run into you. It's got an algorithm to detect what's out there, but it's a very effective way for us to get data. And then the lower or the center picture, Corbett's Dam. So Port Hope, if any of you ever driven by on the 401 as you go over the causeway, go there in the spring or go there in the fall. So the picture you can't see shows the whole plunge pool below that dam is full of rainbow trout. In the spring, it'll be Chinook salmon in the fall. But basically, these fish have come to a dam that was built in the 1800s. They can't get over the dam. They can't get to the places they want to spawn. We created a fishway. This is just a little ladder that allows the fish to jump to pool and pool to get around it. But it's very hard for us to know who's getting around because sea lamprey and invasive fish can get around too. So we put in a counting device, and unfortunately, you're not going to get to see the video. So we basically have a camera that's there year round. The QR codes, if you're an angler, snap those QR codes or go to riverwatcher.com. 24/7, 365, there's a camera that watches all the fish that now go by the Corbett's Dam and on the Credit River as well. Fascinating pictures of all these migratory salmon as they go through. But now with artificial intelligence, we've used image recognition, and we can now, as these fish swim through, that's a brown trout, that's a Chinook salmon, that's an Atlantic salmon. So we get very accurate counts of how many fish are getting up into these rivers so that we can begin to manage the populations above that. So with that, I'll just leave this closing thought up there. You know, a thing is right when it tends to preserve the integrity, the stability, and the beauty of the biotic community. It is wrong otherwise. Our job is to try to maintain the integrity and health of Lake Ontario so it benefits all of us, whether we're an angler, whether we're a swimmer or boater. But it's a fascinating system. I've devoted my life to it. I love it. And hopefully today I helped to give you a bit of the insights about what we do. Thank you.